recording. All right, let me know when you are recording.
I'm recording.
Okay, we are recording for Friends Pitching Fantasy Part 1, Dylan's pitches. So let's go ahead and get some room tone. All right, and the intro music is coming in 3, 2. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to pitch some fantasy at my friend Charles.
I am ready to be pitched at today, Dylan, because today we are launching yet another one of our very famous Friends Pitching Fantasy series. You know, we love to read books here on the Friends Pitching Fantasy podcast, and we have a reading schedule that we like to stick to, and sometimes we just need to figure out what are we going to read next, and we could just pick them off the air, you know, like a lot of shows do. But then it's like, you know what, what's the fun in that? Deciding what to read can be just as fun as the reading itself. Isn't that right, Dylan?
That's exactly right, Charles. And this is a great way of making some delicious content.
Vladimir Harkonnen.
Yeah, exactly. I was definitely summoning some Harkonnen energy there out of making some entertainment out of our decision to read the next couple books, and we'll split it up into an episode where I pitch at you, always 3 books that we go through, and then in a separate episode you pitch 3 books at me. Then we send out some polls to our listeners over at Instagram and the artist formerly known as Twitter, now known as X, and try to get some feedback, what they think we should pick. But at the end of the day, Charles, in that final episode, you and I just will decide whatever we want to read next. Of course, informed by our wonderful listeners and what they want, but not always exactly what is their top choice.
I will say, last time I was heavily influenced by the polls. So it is definitely important, if you feel strongly about a particular book, to cast your vote on the socials. So today, this episode is going to be devoted to Dylan's pitches. He's going to pitch 3 books to me, and then we'll open the polls, and then you'll get to vote on which one of Dylan's pitches you would want us to read on the show. And I will make that choice on Friday, and then, you know, the next episode will be dedicated to my pitches to Dylan, and then we will walk away with 2 books to read on the show. One of Dylan's pitches that he's going to pitch today, and then one of mine that I will pitch on the next episode. So, Dylan, what do you say? Are you ready to share with us what your pitches are today?
Yes, just a little housekeeping here, Charles. I think we're going to be releasing the decision episode the Monday of the following week, right?
Oh,
not on Friday for this
one. I forgot we're doing that little schedule change. Yes, correct, Dylan. That is exactly what we are doing. So be on the lookout for that. But you know, you're in the right place today, because this is the start of it all, of this series of Friends Pitching Fantasy. So, Dylan, I have no idea what you're pitching today. I know I shared mine with you earlier, and I know you had shared with me some preliminary stuff, but you were still very much in deliberation last we spoke. So I'm excited to see what you've brought to the table today.
This is where I landed, Charles. First one's going to be The Magicians, Book 1 of the Magicians Trilogy by Lev Grossman.
Okay.
Book 2 is going to be Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, a Cosmere novel by Brandon Sanderson. And the third pitch is going to be The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. Book 1 of the Wayfarers series.
Okay, interesting.
Yep. How you feeling?
I'm feeling pretty good. This is going to be a tough choice here. One, I know you've already read 2 of these, so I'm excited to see you bring them to the show, because I have not read any of these. Oh no, I read The Magicians. Duh.
Read The
I love The
Magicians,
Magicians.
Charles.
One of my favorite of all time, but it has been like a decade since I've read it.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited about that. I feel like that's been pitched a couple times, and Brandon Sanderson and Becky Chambers, of course, as well. So where are we going to start?
We're going to start with The Magicians. And Charles, this is one that it's interesting. It has a 3.53 on Goodreads across 263,000 ratings, which I believe is much lower than it was back when, much lower average rating, obviously not a much lower number of ratings than back when we read it a decade ago. I do think some of that score was shifted by the sci-fi series that, like the TV show that came out on the Sci-Fi Channel. But anyway, we'll get into that a little bit in the pitch. But let's get into it. What's to say about this book that you don't already know, Charles? You love this series. In fact, you were the one who first recommended this series to me probably about a decade ago at this point, like you mentioned. In some ways, I'm going to have to draw from how you sold me on the book in the first place in my pitch right here. If you can even remember what was going on there 10 years ago, Charles. But
no. Do you have actual receipts or what?
No receipts, just memories. Just
okay.
beautiful, vivid memories.
Sweet memories.
You trying to tell me to read the book. But anyway, for the listeners, let's start with the premise of this book, even though you don't need to hear it, Charles. Some of them probably don't know what it's about. A thrilling and original coming-of-age novel for adults about a young man practicing magic in the real world. Quentin Coldwater is brilliant but miserable. A senior in high school, he's still secretly preoccupied with a series of fantasy novels he read as a child set in a magical land called Fillory. Imagine his surprise when he finds himself unexpectedly admitted to a very secret, very exclusive college of magic in upstate New York, where he receives a thorough and rigorous education in the craft of modern sorcery. He also discovers all the other things people learn in college: friendship, love, sex, booze, and boredom. Something is missing, though. Magic doesn't bring Quentin the happiness and adventure he dreamed it would. After graduation, he and his friends make a stunning discovery. Fillory is real, but the land of Quentin's fantasies turns out to be a much darker and more dangerous than he could have imagined. His childhood dream becomes a nightmare with a shocking truth at its heart. Jeez, this gives away a lot. At once, psychologically piercing and magnificently absorbing. This is the Goodreads, I assume, back of the book grabbed, like blurb or whatever. But anyway, at once psychologically piercing and magnificently absorbing, The Magicians boldly moves into uncharted literary territory, imagining magic as practiced by real people with their capricious desires and volatile emotions. Lev Grossman creates an utterly original world in which good and evil aren't black and white, love and sex aren't simple or innocent, and power comes at a terrible price. Yeah, that's It's a lot to take in there for folks who haven't read this one yet, but it's a complex novel and a complex series. Well, Charles, let's lead with this. This is the book that, from the perspective of us, you and me, and friends talking fantasy as an entity, I think it makes the least sense that we haven't covered yet. Would you agree with that?
I mean, Yeah, it 100%. It's like this and Game of Thrones and like maybe a few others. There's just like it's so obvious, you know.
Yeah, the Game of Thrones thing. Yeah, sure. We haven't read the books in as part of Friends Talking Fantasy, but we've talked about it a bunch of times, and on the show we've had like Game of Thrones, at least the show dedicated episodes. We've not had anything. No episodes dedicated to the magicians. Just it comes
none, which is such a crime because
it is a crime. Yeah, that's the exact word that I was thinking of using. It is criminal, and I almost forget sometimes that we haven't discussed it on here because it just seems like something that you take for granted that this far into the show's existence, 4 years to the month, I believe, Charles. 4 years in, we still haven't had an episode dedicated to the magicians. Wow. And yeah, the main reason I consider it to be a book that's up there with the likes of like Mark Lawrence's books or the First Law series as books that form the foundation of us being lowercase Friends Talking Fantasy before we were ever uppercase Friends Talking Fantasy podcast, right? This is one of those books that I remember us just sitting around talking to each other about for hours before we ever thought, oh, we should turn on a mic and record this for the people.
Exactly, yes. This is definitely one of the driving forces behind Friends Talking Fantasy, for sure. Back when we were just lowercase, it's true.
Exactly. And now we've come far enough into this show where not only are we 4 years in, but we've also read a bunch of Mark Lawrence's books on the podcast. We've read a bunch of Abercrombie's books for the podcast. And we've even interviewed both of those authors. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's like somehow it's like, okay, take these other two like critical book series, and it's like we've covered them both in depth, like the authors' catalogs in depth, and also interviewed them. But the magicians, nothing. Somehow haven't even read the first book. And I know. It's wacky. I remember chatting with you about when you were first trying to pitch it to me, one of the things that you really sold me on was how incredible Lev Grossman's voice is. And I remember you basically had me read the first line of the novel, and I was sold right away. And the first line is, Quentin did a magic trick. Nobody noticed. And that is just going to set the tone for Grossman's dry, witty, and self-aware, perceptive prose that permeates every moment of reading this book and makes it such a pleasure. And that prose and voice, though, is far from the only reason to read this book. The characters, Charles, the characters, as you know, they are so real feeling. I would go so far as to say painfully real, which is probably part of the reason why some people just can't stand this book. Like, it is a contentious book, obviously based on that Goodreads score. It's like some people find it absolutely like not just devastating to read about some things that these characters do and do to themselves and all that kind of stuff, but they just cannot stand how real especially Quentin feels. And I think a lot of fantasy is about escapism for people. And not only does this not always provide that sense of escapism for people, as you get a sense from the premise that I read from the blurb, it kind of flies in the face of that idea of fantasy as escapism by turning that black mirror back on the reader and being like, oh yeah, you get lost in fantasy books just like Quentin. Well, let's examine that a little bit closer and how well would this stuff actually work as escapism if it played out in a more realistic version of what magic or a world like Fillory, which is kind of Narnia inspired, might look like. But anyway, the characters that come through from this book, for me, even a decade out from reading them, the characters of Quentin, Julia, Elliot, Alice, Penny, and many more, they just like stick in my mind in a way that there's some books, I'm sure you'd agree with this, Charles, like you really enjoy the book and then you finish the book and it's almost like you forget everything right after. And you know, we at least have to remember long enough to talk about it in depth. But then like, you know, especially a year, 2 years, 3 years go by, it's like you can't even name some of the characters, but you know you enjoyed it. This book, it's like, Charles, I know every one of those characters I named like brought up a lot of things in your mind about that character or memories about them, even though we're this far away from reading it. And I'll also say, Charles, as a psych guy, I've said this many times before on the podcast, so I won't get too deep into it, but this probably is my favorite depiction of mental health concerns and depression in particular of any book in the fantasy genre. Like the way that Quentin has this persistent depressive distress, it feels so accurate to, like, in my clinical experience, what I've seen from so many clients who are struggling with depression, but isn't at this like extremely severe level, or definitely not this caricaturized version of depression that you can see in many books where it's kind of, brought up for drama. And along those lines, I will say I feel that I have to address the elephant in the room of that sci-fi show. I know lots of folks enjoyed that show, but for us it was just not our cup of tea. I remember I was watching the premiere with your dad and brother, and at first your dad, like maybe after like 10 minutes your dad walks out, maybe after like 20 minutes your brother Chris walked out, and then we're just both like sitting there watching the premiere of the show. Like we had to give it the full, I think it was like 2 episodes before we were done, but we were about ready to walk out ourselves. And it's because it took away all of this nuance that makes the book so incredible, at least in those first couple episodes. And yeah, I think any listeners out there, I want to say too, who weren't fans of the show, I plead with you to give the books a try. And Charles, I plead with you to give us a chance to make that not our most recent memory of The Magicians, being deeply disappointed with a show that seemed like it completely lost the point. Let's put that behind us and let's read this book again, because we owe it to ourselves given our history with this book and this series.
Well said, Dylan. I love this series, so it's probably been pitched in the past 4 years. I'm sure it's come up.
Can I speak to that, Charles? Because I looked.
Yes. Yeah.
It was one of your selections in the first ever Friends Pitching Fantasy, like one of the ones that you pitched. And back then we had this, now it seems silly, idea of the desk rejection, where you'd select 3 books to pitch.
History.
Yeah.
Friends Talking Fantasy lore.
And I think the books that you pitched, other than The Magicians, were both books I hadn't read yet. And we were just in the start of this show, and I was like, I love The Magicians, I know that, but like I desk rejected it because I wanted to hear you pitch books I hadn't read before. So it's never actually gone to the stage, I don't think.
I wonder if I have that original pitch saved somewhere. I'm sure I typed up a whole thing because it was our first one.
Probably, yeah.
But I will remember the one comment I want to add was a blurb from George R.R. Martin about The Magicians, where he says, "The Magicians is to Harry Potter as a shot of Irish whiskey is to a glass of weak tea." And that's coming from George R.R. Martin at like the peak of George R.R. Martin legendary status. So, I mean, he's not wrong. It's not a book full of like action and stuff, but it is just so much more mature. It is a perfect book for people that grew up with Harry Potter and want something, worthy of their adult brains, like, or then give this a read for sure. That sounded a little bit too harsh on Harry Potter, but it's kind of true. I mean, it's for young adults.
George called it weak tea. That's pretty harsh too.
Harry Potter taking shots today.
I'm not the hugest Harry Potter fan, which might surprise some listeners who haven't heard me say that before. Just to be this into fantasy and not be a huge Harry Potter head, which you are, Charles. But I'll say that I think part of how that sci-fi series lost its way was the idea that they wanted to make it like Harry Potter for adults. And they lost the script a little bit, because I think part of what George is getting at there is like there's so much more complexity and flavor and richness to this story beyond just the weak tea of the like. By the way, weak tea I just feel like is like would be an awesome thing to start calling things that are like bad. It's like, bro, that's weak tea. That's sci-fi
tea,
show,
bro.
Weak tea.
Yeah. That was some weak tea.
Yeah,
exactly.
People used to say like weak sauce, right? Wasn't that a thing?
Yeah,
like weak sauce. Yeah, it was like weak tea,
something like that.
But
it's true. And let's get one more comic so we can go on. There's a little bit of meta to this also, because, like you said, the Goodreads is unusually low. Now you have the series. I feel like there's just so much like working against this book in 2024, where it's like, one, that would be a great reason to do an episode on it to bring back all the things we love about it and make it a 5-star thing. And I see Mark Lawrence had a 5-star review as well on Goodreads, and so like there's that chance to re-highlight, give it attention in that light. But also it's like, from like a show perspective, is there enough interest in it, which has never really affected my decision anyway. But it is something where it's like, I don't know where audience perception is at with the Magicians, but I know where it should be. And so that's just a tough thing about this series. So but a strong contender for sure.
Yeah, I'm curious what the reception would be to doing an episode on this. I mean, when you think of the number of ratings, 263,000 Goodreads ratings, that's a lot. That's more than
that is a lot.
I believe it's more than the other 2 books that I'm pitching combined, and one of them is a Hugo award-winning series' first book, and the other one is written by Brandon Sanderson. So that's telling you a lot about how much how many ratings and therefore how much popularity you're seeing for the Magicians. But yeah, right now in 2024, what's the appetite for discussions on it? I don't know, but I'd be interested in finding out.
And it all starts with that vote over on the socials after this episode airs. So
that's true. All right, well, Charles, let's go on to Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, a Cosmere novel by Brandon Sanderson.
Goodreads says it's the Cosmere number 29, and I'm like, I have a feeling that the order is not super critical here.
It better not be, because I mean, I've read a lot of Sanderson. I don't think I've read all 28 of the books that would precede this in that hypothetical reading order. I think it's just a standalone, and you'll get some enjoyment out of knowing things from other books. Like it's narrated by Hoyd is one of the things that means nothing to a lot of readers, but means something to those of us who've read a decent amount of the Cosmere. But anyway, let's get into the pitch. This is one of Sanderson's 4.49 on Goodreads across about 49,000 ratings.
Yeah.
This is one of Sanderson's secret projects they wrote during the pandemic. I've been seeing a lot of people calling it the best among those secret projects. Here's the premise. There is a world, one of endless nights, surrounded by an even deeper darkness, filled with nightmares come to life, twisted shapes that slink to windows and ease open doors, sliding across floors to look down on helpless faces. There's another world, a bright world, so bright it burns, filled with stacked stones that call forth miracles raised by calloused hands that tremble in their work, drained with each stone lifted, settled, lifted again. Between these worlds, 2 souls connect, collide, entwine. A bridge, a path, a road to both worlds changing forever. Yumi comes from a land of gardens, meditation, and spirits, while Painter lives in a world of darkness, technology, and nightmares. When their lives suddenly become intertwined in strange ways, can they put aside their differences and work together to uncover the mysteries of their situation and save each other's communities from certain disaster? There's the premise. I'm assuming you're not super familiar with this one, Charles. I wasn't before getting into the pitch. I do have this beautiful hardcover copy of the book, though. Check that art out.
That is beautiful.
Yeah.
Where did you? Oh, that was one part of the Were you part of the Kickstarter?
No, you can get these.
Okay. Got you.
Anyway, Charles, I want to start by reading you a quote from Brandon Sanderson himself about this book. One that will let you know why I picked it and why it'll be unlike any other Sanderson reading experience that we've had. And I know we've had plenty of Sanderson reading experiences.
We sure have.
He said, "Even for a compulsive planner like me, sometimes a story emerges like magic. Unexpected, unprompted. You build an outline in days, craft worlds during a compulsive daydream, and develop characters with a burst of imagination, like the brief flash of a firework. That was Yumi and the Nightmare Painter for me. The unanticipated story of two people who find one another. May your dreams live as mine sometimes do."
Wow, he's getting really poetic with this one.
Right? Isn't he?
He's like getting real emotional and sentimental and poetic more than he ever has in his writing before. Just that blurb and that dedication. You're like, what the heck?
Exactly. And that's what's been drawing me to this book. That's so interesting to hear from Sanderson. Like, we know he likes to break the art of writing down into a science. He teaches those classes where he comes up with rules and laws for writing fantasy. And we know that he typically plans every little bit of his plots out way in advance. I will mention it's funny to see Sanderson, like, he is talking about how this runs a little counter to the point I'm making, but I have to mention because it's funny. It's like, he is talking about, like, oh, this one just flowed out of me. And when he's describing, he's like, you build an outline in days. It's like, bro, you still outlined?
It flowed through you.
It flowed out of me.
For the outline.
Yeah, outline. But yeah, it's still, to me, as you were noticing, Charles, feels very different. The idea, too, of him outlining in days versus how long he would normally, and I'm sure he gave himself more flexibility, because this is different, this book, and Sanderson's trying to get that across. So it begs the question, what happens when Sanderson just lets a story flow out of him like this? And that's something that I really want to find out. Yeah. Yumi and the Nightmare Painter is probably the best way for us to do just that. From the reviews that I've read, it sounds like Sanderson wrote something totally unique and unlike anything he's done before. Instead of the typical epic fantasy that we've grown used to from him, Sanderson takes a more meditative approach to tackling themes of loneliness and isolation, while also writing a story that has romance and this kind of connection between two people central to the plot. And I know you and I have had critiques of Sanderson's romance writing in the past. Like, we're huge Sanderson fans, but we've always said probably the weakest part of his writing is when he tries to write romance, and we know it's not something that he typically is emphasizing in a book, but now I'm seeing all these reviews for Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, and everyone's praising him writing this romance. So it's another moment where it's like,
wow,
like, wait, what's going on here? This is different. And it seems like this might be his most creative work yet, his most poetic work yet. I see people describing it as enchanting, imaginative, even using words like beautiful, which is not something that you really think of when you think of Sanderson's writing. It's like, you're like, Sanderson's efficient. Like, people are saying this one is beautiful. It's really
Wow.
interesting to see. And we know that we can never go wrong with one of Brandon Sanderson's books. And it's been a while since we've picked one up. I say, let's go for one that will show us his range in a way that we've never seen before. Let's give Yumi and the Nightmare Painter a try and see what all the fuss is about.
That's well said. What? So is there? I know he had released a bunch of books at once as part of his Kickstarter, and I almost pitched a different one, but I ended up not doing that. But I'm just kind of curious, what made you pick this one in particular? Is it that this poetic romance thing stands out? Is that the main reason you chose it?
I mean, I'll say the first thing that attracted me to this book was the cover, and I'll just say folks can Google that and take a look at the cover because it is gorgeous in itself, and it's different too, right? It's not like any of Sanderson's other covers that we can think of, which are typically like, really well done, but like classic epic fantasy style covers. And I was like, wait, what is this? This is like all these colors, but it's also got a like white as the base, and these two characters that kind of evoke like an anime style to it. So I saw that, and I was immediately drawn in by the idea of a different Sanderson work. And then if you start looking at the back, it has that dear reader, even for a compulsive player like me bit, and I'm like, oh, okay, like this is different, and this is the one of the, and look at the reviews, like they're phenomenal. And I guess when you've read as much Sanderson as I have, as you have, as we know many in the fantasy sphere have, it's like, you know what you're getting, and sometimes you're like, what? Yeah, like let's see what else this guy can do. And it kind of made me think about The Emperor's Soul is what came up for me. Part of it is like the painting kind of made me think about that, but also the idea of a book where Sanderson seems a little bit like more, the word I used was like meditative. Like the Emperor's Soul isn't full of action, and it doesn't have a lot of those typical elements that we see from Sanderson. I was like, wait, this feels almost like capital L literature, like a little bit of a step away. I'm like, this seems like it might bring about that feeling. And I really love The Emperor's Soul. I know you did too. We talked about it with Phantology way back. And I don't know, it's different. Like I've heard good things about some of the other ones, like Tress and the Emerald Sea. People say really good things about, but I don't know, it's different.
I mean, it certainly piqued my interest. It sounds like Brando Sando really branched out with this one, so I'm curious to give it a try. Yeah, Brancho Sando. So we'll have to see how that goes.
Yeah, I mean, this is one that I have the book, and I'm like, I think I might end up reading this one anyway. So we'll see. We'll see what you end up picking. It might allow me to double up my personal reading and my FTF reading if you end up picking this one. But don't let that sway you, Charles. That is not to be a consideration here.
Got it. Okay. Well, yeah, it's a really tempting pick. How can you go wrong with Brandon Sanderson? And I haven't read any of those like COVID big releases from his Kickstarter and all that. So I'd be kind of curious to see what he's up to there.
Yeah, me too.
But I'm also curious to see where you're going with your third rec here.
Of course. This is The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers, and that's book one of the Wayfarer series. It's a national bestseller and part of the Hugo Award-winning Wayfarer series. Okay, premise. Follow a motley crew on an exciting journey through space, and one adventurous young explorer who discovers the meaning of family in the far reaches of the universe in this lighthearted debut space opera from a rising sci-fi star. I feel like Becky Chambers has probably risen already. Like, I don't know if she... I mean, I'm sure her star is still rising, but you know what I'm
Yes.
saying. This is kind of when it was her debut. But anyway,
Like she's broken through.
she's broken through. Once you win a Hugo, I don't think people are like rising.
It's Rising Star, Hugo Award winner.
Yeah. Rosemary Harper doesn't expect much when she joins the crew of the aging Wayfarer. We know the Rosemary idea is going to appeal to you, Charles, as a child of a Rosemary.
Right.
While the patched up ship has seen
friend of the show.
Guest of the show.
That's right.
While the patched up ship has seen better days, it offers her a bed, a chance to explore the far off corners of the galaxy, and most importantly, some distance from her past. An introspective young woman who learned early to keep to herself, she's never met anyone remotely like the ship's diverse crew, including Syssix, the exotic reptilian pilot, chatty engineers Kizzy and Jenks, who keep the ship running, and Ashby, their noble captain. Life aboard the Wayfarer is chaotic and crazy, exactly what Rosemary wants. It's also about to get extremely dangerous when the crew is offered the job of a lifetime. Tunneling wormholes through space to a distant planet is definitely lucrative and will keep them comfortable for years. But risking her life wasn't part of the plan. In the far reaches of deep space, the tiny Wayfarer crew will confront a host of unexpected mishaps and thrilling adventures that force them to depend on each other. To survive, Rosemary's got to learn how to rely on this assortment of oddballs, an experience that teaches her about love and trust, and that having a family isn't necessarily the worst thing in the universe. Wow. Charles, do you remember me pitching this book already?
I do, or like, you had read it or something. Like, I remember this name. I remember this book. Have you read it?
Yeah, I read it
okay.
a long time ago. But yeah, I forgive you for not having complete memory of it because I pitched it in our second ever Friends Pitching Fantasy back in November of 2020. Yeah. This was back in the days where like what we end up picking, we would just like read the whole series. So it was like a big gap between the first and the second Friends Pitching Fantasies. But yes, November 2020, I pitched this book. Do you know what I pitched it against, Charles?
The second one ever was that First Law.
Yes.
It was?
Yes.
Okay.
And can you remember the other one?
Lies of Locke Lamora?
Exactly, Charles. That is
look at me go.
Steel trap.
I know my FTF lore.
There. Yes.
Well, I remember because that piled on to the myth of me not reading Lies of Locke Lamora. I'm like, dude, you pitched First Law. And I was like, I know you for the first one, you pitched Patrick Rothfuss. And so I was like, okay, well, that would have been the first one. So the second one was probably First Law. So that's great that I remember. Look at me go. Good
job. And we know what you picked there. You picked First Law, and we can't blame you too much for that. We've talked about now that the campaign to get you to read.
I still got crucified, over. But it's whatever.
Yeah, but we can't blame you now.
No regrets. But now we've read both of those, and here we are, still having not read The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet.
We have not. And we've talked about Lies of Locke Lamora having been always a bridesmaid and never the bride when it came to Friends Pitching Fantasy. But Charles, I don't think he even invited The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet to be in the wedding party. I don't even know if they're invited to the wedding at all. And that's a shame because this book has so much to offer besides just an amazing title. Right, you gotta give them props.
Oh, yeah. Amazing.
One of the strengths presented by this series is a diverse cast full of strong characters. I feel that many of the aspects of the space opera are going to come off as very fresh compared to the fantasy that we've been reading. Let's think of this as kind of a palate cleanser when you mix in a space opera. Long Way has some of the strongest found family vibes of any series I've ever read. It has an eclectic group of characters from backgrounds that are entirely different from each other, representing a variety of alien species with totally different cultures, but they just bring that into their experience on the Wayfarer, and it doesn't get caught up on all that world building, hence a space opera rather than sci-fi. It's just like, okay, these people are coming in and they have these identities, they're like this, and they just gotta find a way to fit together on this ship. So this represents a diverse cast full of fully fleshed out characters that are really different but have to work together. In particular, it has strong LGBTQ plus representation as well. It dives into big picture important topics like prejudice and diversity, but it never loses sight of the entertainment value that it provides through the intimate story that it is telling. It's optimistic and hopeful in its tone. Becky Chambers' perspective, in which she writes Longway, is optimistic and hopeful without veering all the way to, oh god, I'm gonna try this word, Charles. I'm gonna try this word.
All right,
quixotic. Quixotic.
Whoa, quixotic.
Yeah.
What is that?
It's actually named after like Don Quixote. Like he was overly optimistic.
The
but
man
then,
of La Mancha.
For some reason, they didn't. It's so I was like, is it quixotic? But no, it's quixotic, I believe, is how it's pronounced, which is lame. It would be cool if it was like quixotic or whatever. But anyway, it's bad things happen in Becky Chambers' universe, just like in any other one. But where all that optimism that I keep talking about comes from is this like belief in I was going to say humanity, but a lot of these characters aren't human, but this belief in humanoid creatures that they can be well-intentioned and that they usually are trying to do the right thing. And when we read all this grimdark on our show, it's like, well, it's nice to get a little bit of the other side in. And
so
I would compare the tone of the book in that way to House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune, which is a book that both of us loved. And it's also funny, kind of like House in the Cerulean Sea. So I see a lot of parallels there, even though, and the LGBTQ plus representation. So there's a lot of things in common with a book that you love, and I believe a book that you pitched at me way back that I ended up choosing. So, Charles, I think it's time to invite Becky Chambers' first book in this Hugo Award-winning series to the wedding party. It's time that we pick up a book that Tor.com said the following about. Planet is a heartwarming debut novel that will restore your faith in science fiction specifically and humanity in general. Charles, a book that can restore your faith in humanity. Even yours can warm your cold, frigid heart that has never allowed you to cry from a book. This is the one, Charles. I don't think it'll make you cry, but it can restore your faith in humanity.
Hey, I always like a good, like, palate cleanser, sweet, loving book, sign me up. How does it compare to something that we've read, like All Systems Red, Martha Wells?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I think there are some parallels you could see in the voice, like a humorous space opera sort of setting, and you can definitely see the found family vibes in the Murderbot series, at least in All Systems Red as well. But they're wholly different books. I would say I think it's more like the book has this really like diverse cast of characters and is much more of a ensemble cast than Murderbot has. Like, I know there are a bunch of other characters other than Murderbot in All Systems Red, but let's be real. like Murderbot is the very clear star of the show, where in this book, like, I would not say that Rosemary Harper is like the be all end all by any means of this crew of characters. Like, you do need a main character to kind of view as this like newcomer who's arrived on this ship and is meeting all these characters. But I would say the ensemble cast nature of the book is a big strength and something that's different from the Murderbot Diaries.
Wow. Well, I mean, we haven't read a book like that in a while, so this seems like a really great alternative pick. And, you know, it's alternative. We're talking a Hugo Award-winning author here, so... Man, and one of the OG picks. You went back into the archives for some of these pitches here with Magicians and Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. You got some Brando Sando.
Yeah.
It's quite the mix.
Back to the roots.
Back to the roots. And you know what? I think the only thing for me to help, I need the votes, guys. I'm kidding. If you vote, great. I'll figure it out. But it's curious to see where the votes are going to fall with this one. I feel like, going up against Brando Sando in this day and age is tough. But who knows? There's fans out there of all kinds. We've been surprised by these polls before. So I'm really excited to see where it ends up. And when we pick next week... I'll have a tough choice ahead of me.
That's well said, Charles. But like you said, I think the votes are going to help provide you some clarity here. And the sooner that we can get to that point, the better. So let's get that sweet, sweet outro music going. And you and I will move toward your pitches, which should come out a couple days after this episode.
Yes. Let's get that outro music pumping. Thank you, everyone, one and all, for listening to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast. If you like what you heard today and you want to support the show, cast your vote on which of these three wonderful books that Dylan has pitched you would want to hear us talk about and read on the show. Best way to do that is over on the socials. That's at the FTF Podcast on TikTok and Instagram, and at the FTF Podcast with the number 1 at the end on Twitter. Now, Dylan, if they like what they heard today, if they casted their vote on the socials, and they want to support the show even more for free, what can they do?
Toss 5 stars to our podcast, which you can do over on Spotify. All you gotta do is go to the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast feed, click About, and then click where those stars are, and 5 of them would be a good choice. You can also rate and review on Apple Podcasts. That means you can say nice things about us. You can say, hey, Charles, I don't blame you for any of your choices in any of the past Friends Pitching Fantasies. I know you're trying
for me.
I know you're trying your best, because I just read The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, and it restored my faith in humanity generally, and you, Charles, specifically. But wow. You don't have to do that, because just listening is more than enough. Thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you all so much for listening all the way to the end. We greatly appreciate your support. Thank you. And as always, go forth and conquer, friends.